Because the moment we say artha, the common parlance understanding is it is about wealth. But somebody might think that Arthashastra means a treatise on personal wealth management or something like that. It's not true. Arthashastra is Rajadharma. Kautilya uses what is called Yoga Kshema. He uses what is called Yoga and Kshema are the two cardinal principles in Danda. Yoga is our ability to acquire what we want. And think about a citizen. I should be able to acquire what I want. That is called yoga. Kshema is what I should keep and enjoy. I mean, if both of them are lost, what is there? I mean, if I am able to obtain and somebody takes it away, or it is very difficult for me to, accumulate assets which I want, it's not going to work. So the entire law system works on yoga kshema. See, this pakvam, this fruit must be plucked only when it is ripe, which means you should tax at the right time. You should not excessively tax, you should not tax prematurely. He says if you do all that, the citizens will get very upset, they will finish you off. Good evening, and it's my pleasure to be with the Sangam team here. And today we will spend a little time on Arthashastra. Arthashastra is a very important text. It's a very wide text, I must say. Unfortunately, as it is with respect to many Indian scriptures, we really do not know much about Arthashastra. Therefore, I would take a little bit of time just to introduce quickly what we can see in Arthashastra, and then I would like to focus a little bit on some wonderful concepts of public administration, which we will also see that it can be very useful in management also. When you say public administration, we always think it's government, but then the ideas in Arthashastra are so good that we can even apply it in business. So I would sort of end with that kind of idea. Okay, so let's first start with a little bit of an introduction. We have this concept of Veda and Vedanga, and there is something called Upaveda also. So Arthashastra is generally considered as one of the Upavedas. Okay, that is the stature given to Arthashastra. It's a seminal work in public administration management, and it is 200 BC, so something like 2000 plus years. But interestingly, after I think 11th century, somehow we missed Arthashastra. There are no references of Arthashastra. It sort of disappeared from the scene until 1920, when one farmer, when he was ploughing his field in Mysore, somewhere near Mysore, something stuck in the ground when he was ploughing, and then he found a manuscript. He did not know what it was, and he gave it to the Oriental Research Institute in Mysore. And there was one Dr. Kamashastri who actually, so the Arthashastra that we know came out again in 1920, when he went through it and then created a proper manuscript of that. And of course, so in the last 100-120 years, there is a sort of a revival of Arthashastra as an important text. What is very interesting about Arthashastra is there is a good clarity of thought. The ideas discussed are quite comprehensive, and in terms of whatever subject matter that has been discussed in Arthashastra. So what we will do is, let me first start, because the moment we say artha, the common parlance understanding is it is about wealth. But somebody might think that Arthashastra means a treatise on personal wealth management or something like that. It's not true. Arthashastra is Rajadharma. So let me very quickly, the first mantra in the book clearly defines what is it. So look at here, Prithivya labhe palanecha yavant arthashastrani purvacharyahi prastapitani prayah tani samhritya ekam idam arthashastram kritam. So in the very first mantra, Kautilya says it's not my work. People have done before. I have sort of collected them together and present to you, and that is called Arthashastra. And so that's how he starts the whole text. And very quickly, in the first book, first chapter, which is what we are here, Kautilya also quickly enumerated how large is this. So this shloka says, Shastram Uddeshaha Panchadasham Adhikaranani. So there are 15 adhikaranas, 15 books, so to say. Sashiti Prakarana Shatam. Ashiti is 80. Sashiti is plus 80. Prakarana Shatam, 180 sections is what he is talking about. Sa Panchashad Adhyaya Shatam. So 150 chapters are there. So that is what it is. And Sukha Grahana Vijnayam Tattvartha Pada Nischitam. So to properly understand, I have laid it out like this: 15 books, 180 sections, 150 chapters, and 6,000, call it shloka, mantra, whatever it is. So that is what Arthashastra is, 15 books. And that's how Kautilya has put this whole thing. So since I said it's Rajadharma, there are some Rajadharmas, equivalent texts that we can think of. Mahabharata is one, the Shanti Parva, the beautiful conversation between Bhishma Pitamah and Yudhishthira comes under Rajadharma. Anushasana Parva is also there. Manusmriti is very good ideas on governance in terms of how do you administer justice, punishment, etc., etc. Book 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, we can see those kinds of things in Manusmriti. Of course, we have Kautilya, then this Niti Sara of Kamandaka. This is the last piece which closely followed Arthashastra, around 11th century, I think. Then, of course, much later, you have Manasollasa of Someshwara. Goes on. I'm not going to go through all of them. Just to tell you that the Dandaniti of Keshava Pandita, who was actually a minister in Shivaji's cabinet. So, ideas on punishment and etc. So, Arthashastra is not about personal wealth. It is one of the Rajadharma, which means it is a text on public administration and how do you administer a state and so on. So, that's what it is. Talking of public administration, we know that there are alternative systems. Monarchy is one, where you have the king, and then after the king's son comes, a little later his son comes, etc., etc. So that is one system. Or we have what is called democracy today, where people elect the head of the government, and whichever way, whether it is a monarchy or a democracy, whichever way we look at, the core objective of this public governance is what? It is all about securing earthly resources for a sustainable consumption by the citizens. That's the idea at the end of the day. So that's the core issue addressed in Arthashastra. Therefore, we don't have to say, oh, Arthashastra was written when there were kings. Today we have a democracy, so Arthashastra is not going to make sense. We don't have to say that, because the basic idea of a public administration is how do you secure your territory? How do you make things easy for citizens? So those are the ideas in Arthashastra. So therefore, I thought I should really say that before we go further. So very clearly, Arthashastra is not about discussing whether monarchy is good or democracy is good. In fact, Kautilya is not at all interested in any of those. Not even about the origin of the state. How did the state form? He was not interested in all that. Arthashastra's focus is only on practical administration. I mean, here is a nation state, and how do you administer it? That makes it a very interesting piece, and that makes it very special. And it's high time many of us should seriously look at what Arthashastra contains actually, because it's all about practical administration. So let me very quickly give a big picture of Arthashastra. Now, this entire Arthashastra, as I told, was organized in 15 books. But if you look at the book 6, book 1 has an introduction, it talks about the king. Book 2 is the biggest. 1/5 of Arthashastra is in book 2. A lot of delegation, decentralization, all those issues are there. In book 6, the first mantra in book 6, Kautilya establishes how can you define the elements of a state. Ideally, it should have been at the beginning. I don't know why he chose to put it in the 6th book, but nevertheless, that defines. So, it is called Sapta Prakriti. So this is that mantra 6.1.1 as you see here. Swami Amatya Janapada Durga Kosha Danda Mitra Sapta Mitrani Prakritayah. So that's the definition. Essentially he says any state, if you want to understand public administration, you can understand it through a Kautilyan lens which consists of 7 elements. That's the point he is making. So the first one is Swami, which is the king. So therefore that's the starting of the entire exercise. Then you have Amatya, which is a council of ministers. In fact, when we read all these, what we will find is a striking parallel to what you see today. You have a prime minister's office, you have a council of ministers, you have a cabinet, etc., etc. You have secretaries. All those are beautifully written here. So the Amatya. Then of course you have the territory, which is the Janapada. A kingdom is as much as a certain expanse of land. So therefore that comes as the third element. Then of course in those days, this is a little peculiar to those times, the kings are stationed in a Durga, in a fort. So winning or losing a game is all about capturing the king. So how do you actually have this capital fortified? So those kinds of issues are there. Today it's slightly different in any case. Then of course you have the Kosha, which is the treasury, the finances, public finance as we speak today. Then we have the army, Danda. And the entire Arthashastra is based on what is called a Matsya Nyaya. The idea of law and justice, which Kautilya thought about, is that the bigger fish should not eat the smaller fish. That's how the whole idea of Danda, the whole justice system was beautifully designed. Of course, then you have the Mitra, the allies. In fact, many of these you will find in practice today. So therefore, that's what it is. You have Amatya, which has two connotations. The kingmaker is one meaning of Amatya. Then a group of, today we call it as the cabinet committee on, not all ministers are part of cabinet committee today. That's the equivalent of an Amatya actually. Then of course we have the territory, which is all about land use, zoning regulation, developing lands, getting revenue out of the land. All these issues come out of Janapada. We have of course the Durga, as I already spoke about. Kosha is the entire idea of finances, public finances. Danda, which is the protection. In fact, Kautilya uses what is called Yoga Kshema. He uses what is called Yoga and Kshema are the two cardinal principles in Danda. Yoga is our ability to acquire what we want. And think about a citizen. I should be able to acquire what I want. That is called yoga. Kshema is what I obtained, I should keep and enjoy. I mean, if both of them are lost, what is there? I mean, if I am able to obtain and somebody takes it away, or it is very difficult for me to, accumulate assets which I want, it's not going to work. So the entire law system works on yoga kshema. So that's what happens in, And of course, you have this state, and then you can create alliances with the neighbors. Some of them may be adversarial, some of them are friendly. So how do we handle these dynamics of global politics, political landscape that we have? All these are very nicely thought about in Arthashastra. So a Kautilyan state very beautifully gives us an understanding of what are the complexities of running a state, and Kautilya has distilled it into 7 elements. So a good understanding of public administration comes from understanding what is Swami, what is Amatya, what is Janapada, Durga, Kosha, Danda and Mitra. I am not going to get into all of those. I will very quickly show you some facets of some of these, and finally I will perhaps show you that the 7 prakritis that we are talking about has such a striking similarity to modern multinational corporations. So I think we should also understand that part of it as we go along. Okay, so there are vast amount of building blocks. Since I just want to kindle a little interest, I want to just sprinkle a few ideas as a very introductory kind of a thing. So let me take you through some of these concepts that you find. First of all, when he talks about Amatya, very beautifully Kautilya says, why do you have to do delegation? I mean, this is an in thing in management. People say you have to decentralize, you have to delegate, etc. But look at why it needs to be done. His definition is very interesting. Look at what he is saying. Yoga pattattu karmanam anekatvat అనేకస్తత్వాచ్చ దేశకాలాత్యయో మా భూత్ ఇది పరోక్షం అమాత్యైః కారయేత్. He puts 4 beautiful conditions. Yogapatat. Simultaneously things will happen in a large state. Even in a multinational it is like that. You have market, something happens in Africa, something happens in India. So Yogapatat. Things happen simultaneously. The karmanam. Several activities happen and they all happen simultaneously. That's the first condition. Second condition, anekatvat. It is not a single activity. There are millions of activities. Something called R&D, something called marketing, something called finance, something called operations. All kinds of things happen. So the activities are multifold. Anekatvat. Then anekastatvacha. The sthala is also different. All of them doesn't happen in one place. It happens in different places. So he says there are 3 things. Simultaneity, variety of activities, all of them happening at different places. Then if you don't do decentralization and delegation, what will happen? Delays will happen. That's what he is saying. He is saying there should not be a deterioration in terms of desha and kala. People should not be waiting. Today we talk about ombudsman, we talk about citizens charter and so on. All those you can see here. Desha kala yayaha mabut. Let there not be unnecessary wastage of time and effort and all that. Therefore, parokshahi. They will not be in front of me. My manager will be sitting in Bangalore, or somebody may be sitting in San Francisco. So it is paroksha, not aparoksha. Amatyaihi karet. These kinds of ideas. Why do you need delegation? At what time you need delegation? All those are very nicely, sort of laid out. I thought I'll just give you an example of that. And this idea of delegation has been taken to such an extreme levels in Arthashastra, thinking that it has been done 2000 plus years back is amazing. Look at here, there are 33 heads of departments. This entire information is available in book 2 of Arthashastra, which is the largest book, and 1/6 of Arthashastra is contained in book 2 because there is a very extensive government machinery. And I have sort of categorized the 33 directors or heads under some homogeneous titles to my convenience. For example, I say trade and industry, there are some of them. State trading, weights and measures. Look at weights and measures. If you go and read Arthashastra, what you will find is he says what are all the different scales to be fabricated, in what frequency it must be calibrated. If the government officer does not calibrate, what kind of penalties, how your citizens are not cheated. Extensive details. One good thing about Arthashastra, unlike many other Indian texts, is there is phenomenal level of detail. It's not just a 10,000 feet statement. It's not just saying we need weights and measures. It's a complete design of 12 different scales and frequency in which it has to be calibrated, the fee for calibration, the penalty for not calibration, that level of detail. So like that you have, you have defense, you have mining, treasury and finance, you have some chief of, salt commissioner, etc., etc., land use and livestock, shipping and movement, even citizen services like, entertainment, gambling, prostitution, everything he has thought about. So it's a very extensive understanding of how do you organize delivering public service. I think there is a lot for us to seriously read book 2 of Arthashastra to understand what is the spirit behind what he has said, and is there something which we can seriously go after it. I think these are very worthwhile things that for us to do today. Just look at here, there is, as I told you, there is a level of detail which amazes me in Arthashastra. For example, this is the salary to be given. It starts from 48,000 panas and goes up to, I think, even 40 panas or something. I've just stopped at 1,000. You see there are 6 pillars of administrative mechanism. You have what is called King's Cabinet, you have Palace Administration, you have Defense, Treasury, Revenue and Law and Order and Civil Administration. So such a level of detail. Just to give you a sense that this is a text which has drilled deep into the very idea of public administration and provided very interesting insights for us to really look at. Now the most interesting part is the kosha, the depth of understanding of financial planning. Again, I want to very quickly take you through a little bit of a sense of what it is. Kautilya is very good thoughts on economic administration, and surprisingly it is one of the world's oldest treatise on economic administration because it's 2000 years, more than 2000 years. We are not aware of any text which is like this. Especially when he says, I am only, putting things together. That means it must have been there even before. I am only just putting them together. That's how he has written Arthashastra. Essentially what he has done is, he said, Bharadwaja said this, Ushana said this, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with all of them, this is my view, this is how it is written. So you have the benefit of all the views as well as Kautilya's views. That's how it is done. The wealth of the state was totally on the basis of the surplus stored in the king's treasury, the commodity warehouse and the granary, the store for the forest produce. So there is a certain conceptualization of how does the wealth accumulate to a state. Then of course there is very good financial planning, well-defined heads of income and well-defined heads of expenditure also. It's all well laid out, budgeting procedures, auditing procedures. When do you submit the audit? If you don't submit the audit, what will happen? All those different types of tax and fee and penalty, etc., etc. All those are baffling if we read. So I will just show that. But behind all this is a very interesting observation he makes. Look at what he's saying. Pakvam pakvam iva aramat palam rajyat avapniyat. Atmacheda bayat amam varjayet kopakarakam. See, this pakvam, this fruit must be plucked only when it is ripe, which means you should tax at the right time. You should not excessively tax, you should not tax prematurely. He says if you do all that, the citizens will get very upset, they will finish you off. So, I mean, that apart, the humorous part apart, I think the point here is, there is this mechanism of how do you decide the timing of taxation, the elements of taxation in such a way that the citizens are not feeling very pained. They are very willingly sort of contributing to the state exchequer. That's the spirit you see when you actually look at Arthashastra and so on. There are 7, 8 major sources of income. One is called mulya, which is the price. Then you have bhaga, 1/6 of the produce. You have vyaji, there is a variety of taxes which are imposed on sales. You have pariga, which is the productive duty for safeguarding state goods. You have klipta, you have rupika, and you have atyaya. So, in all these there are sub details I have just given you. I will just show you one table so that you get a sense of how much elaborate thinking has gone behind this revenue part, because a state is only as good as the intelligent ways by which you are able to gather revenue so that citizen welfare can happen, development can happen, and so on. So let us look at this table. Look at here, there are customs duty, we have import duty. I put all the Sanskrit names. These are all I culled out from Arthashastra actually. So, you have, I'm not going to read all of them, just to tell you, you have transaction tax, you have, as I told you, bhaga, which is 1/6. You have taxes in kind. You don't have to pay taxes always in cash. I mean, this is very interesting. I am a merchant. My produce is not selling. And if you ask me to pay in cash, you are doubly penalizing me. You take the kind and then you do. I mean, that seems to be a very interesting idea actually, because people will be more than willing to pay the tax without much heartburn and so on. You have taxes, countervailing duties, you have octroi, turnover tax, all that we are talking today, we find. You have the mudrana, which is the fee for entering into the state. So it's like a chapa on your passport or visa or things like that. So a whole lot of things. Then of course there is a gamut of fees and service charges. And what I have not included in this table is a huge mechanism of penalties. In fact, Kautilya is not interested in making money out of penalties. It is just that it is a deterrence, and in case people are not falling in line, there is an additional source of income for the state. I mean, that is what modern thinking is also, if you really see. So those kinds of things are part of finance. So there is a very elaborate financial planning, which we can see book 3, book 4 of Arthashastra. In fact, book 3 and 4 also have wonderful ideas on law and justice. If somebody is interested, they can always look at it in a little more detail and so on. Just to give you an example, look at here, audit procedures. It is coming in book 2, chapter 7. Account should come on the Ashada full moon day. Just like we are saying 1st of April, 31st of March and so on. So at that time it is Ashada full moon day. And then there are a whole lot of instructions, which officer must bring it, what are all the documents he should bring along with him, how should he present it, the person who is going through it, what is his or her expectations. That's the level of detail. If they don't do it, what kind of penalty the officer will also face, not only the person who submitted the accounts and so on. That amazes me. Such an amount of clarity, detailing of an idea, which is unparalleled in many other scriptures which you see in Arthashastra. Okay, so what I will do is I very quickly gave a quick sense of kind of things that you can see. The 7 elements are the fundamental principles. In fact, book 7 to 12 in Arthashastra is all about foreign policy. It's all about territorial expansion, because somehow Kautilya felt strongly about it. So there are a lot of ideas on that. And of course, topics are a little bit here and there, but when I say book 7 to 12 has foreign policy, that means most of it is there. When I say book 3 and 4 has issues on law and justice, most of the ideas are there. Book 5 has some more ideas on salary, how do you fix salary, etc. So this is how the whole thing is done. So now what I will do is, I will just show you that the idea is not just public administration. You will find a striking parallel of these ideas with modern business organizations also, that simply extends the value and scope of Arthashastra as its contemporary application. So being a professor of a business school, I must do it. So let me do that for you. So we have this king, Swami, Amatya, Janapada, Durga Kosha, Durga Mitra, Mitrani, Prakritayah. That is what he stated. Now you can completely map it to a business organization. The equivalent of the Swami is the CEO, or the owner. It can be a sole proprietorship, it could be possibly, if it is a limited company, still there is a majority share with only the owner. So there is a notion of owner always. So you have the owner, then you have the key personnel. If you ask what are these key personnels, if you ask, and those are the CXOs, the board, executive and the non-executive part of the board, the consultants, all these are the equivalent of the Amatya. Because if you read Amatya in Arthashastra, you will find the roles that are mapping into what is expected of them, what do they do and so on. It will neatly map into a modern organization of board, and which has the executive and the non-executive components, the CXOs and the consultants. Now this Janapada is all about markets. All that Kautilya talks about, how do you expand, how do you make it very productive, how do you get the best out of it, all those will map into the Janapada in a context of a business organization is of course the employees, the customers, the channel partners, the service providers. They are the Janapada. They give expression to so-called market share, or the size of the market, or whichever way we want to really talk about. They construct the market. The equivalent of a land in a public administration is the market, and these are the people who really do it. Now strategic barriers, Durga, the equivalent of that in modern business organization is what is called know-how. You have a patent regime, you have intellectual property, innovation is only as good as our ability to actually protect it. In fact, I can for the next 1 hour talk about how innovators never made money. The money was made by somebody else because they didn't have strategic barriers. Today we have what is called CT scan. Siemens and GE and all these people are the big players. They are making money, but they were not the inventors. The inventors was a company in UK called Electric Machinery Incorporated in 1946. They didn't have strategic barriers. So their innovation spilled out. Why? I am using a PowerPoint now. Microsoft Office is not the innovator of Word and Excel and PowerPoint, particularly Word and Excel. When I was a student 35 years back, we used to use what is called Boroland Corporation, Lotus and WordPerfect. They couldn't sustain Microsoft Office just in value appropriated. So it's very important that we should have strategic barriers, because otherwise innovators will never make money out of it. That's an important principle in. So one can read the fort and the types of fort and understand the first principles of that and make sense of it in a modern kind of business organization. That's what I mean by strategic barriers. Then of course we have what is called Kosha. I'm not going to talk too much about Kosha. because it's very similar. I don't have to really talk differently. Public administration is public finance, this is corporate finance. The ideas are very simple and very similar, some differences, but by and large. Then comes this danda. Now, danda in a corporate is all about compliances, and it's all about making sure that no mischief happens, everything is in place, people are taken care, etc. All those are the equivalent of the danda. If you read the entire danda in Arthashastra, we will be able to map it to controls and processes, audit, compliance, CSR, accountability. All those will come under what is called danda, so one can draw ideas from there. Then of course we have the Mitrani or Mitra, who are the equivalent or the collaborators. You have joint ventures, you have alliances. In fact, what Kautilya talks about, he talks about circle of kings. So there are neighbors who are very adversarial. We also have our own examples in this country. Every country has it for that matter. So in the same way, and how do you handle it, etc. In the same way, if we read those ideas, we will understand that some of them are competitors to us, direct competitors. Some of them are collaborators. Some of them are alliance partners. So how do you deal with them? What are some of the basic principles of that? So you can think about those ideas using what is called the Mitra concept in Arthashastra, which will map onto joint ventures and alliances, technology transfer, etc., etc. Now, there are a lot of interesting frameworks. For example, this whole idea of Sama, Dana, Beda, Danda is very nicely articulated in Arthashastra. Because Kautilya, that's why he spent half the, book 7 to 12, he spent on territorial expansion. Somehow he felt that was very important. That's what even modern corporations think. Our neighbors all the time want to take a few square meters of our land. This seems to be the preoccupation all over the world. So somehow the territorial expansion is very important. So he has used principles like Samadana, Beda, Danda and so on. I will take one other framework, which is an interesting framework. I will take one other framework, which again he articulates the foreign policy through that framework, or territorial expansion through that framework. So let us try to understand how it has some relevance to modern day business also. So he talks about 6 methods of territorial expansion in Arthashastra. You have what is called Sandhi, you have Vigraha, you have Asana, Yana, Samshaya and Dvaidhi Bhava. Dvaidhi Bhava means, you do both. Yana means you march. Asana means just keep quiet. This is not the right time. So you just stay back. Samashaya is seeking shelter with another. Not only that time is not appropriate, you need a support. So better you do that. There are nice strategies which he talk about. So if you look at these strategies, I am able to directly relate it to quite a few questions that we have in business administration today, in businesses today. Because we ask, if I just strike the word territorial and replace it with the word market, then that's the idea of a business. Everybody says, I want to increase my market share. I want to grow 10%, 20% over years and so on. So therefore, some of the ideas that you see here, personally to me, it mapped directly to some ideas of business administration. So let me just throw those questions in front of you. So, one can say, how can we increase the market share? That's a very important question. So it's as good as asking in Arthashastra, what are the strategies for territorial expansion? That's exactly the equivalent that we are talking about. Therefore, if we start looking at those ideas and try to make sense of what is happening there, perhaps we take a leaf or two from there. So that kind of a question one can ask. Or one can ask, how should we negotiate with potential collaborators? How do you deal with competitors? It's a very valid question, and it's a very sensible and important question. And in Arthashastra, he has come with this idea of a circle of 12 kings, because some of them are competitors, some of them are collaborators. So then there are some rules. Enemy is my friend, and we casually use those words. I don't want to throw such casual sentences here, because sometimes we may think it is only that much. All that I'm saying is this whole idea of this notion of circle of kings. How do you deal with these people at the first degree, second degree, and etc.? All those may be useful. How do you do with the competitor? What do you do with the competitor's competitor? In another plane, he may be a competitor with someone. So is there a way you can sort of work with them? So these kind of ideas can be thought about, and to answer those questions, maybe why can't we read this? Maybe we get some interesting ideas, some insights, which will open up some new thinking in us. That's the idea. One can ask when and when not to plan for a new market entry. It's like saying when do you do asana and when do you do yana or vigraha or things like that. Exactly that. When do you enter into a market? When you don't. There are times where you have to delay your introduction. There may be, so one can actually read that and understand the first principles of where is he coming from, and maybe we have relevance to look at it in a context of business administration also. So one can look for those kinds of things. What is the value of multiple joint ventures and alliances? It's exactly saying, can you tell me what is this whole framework called the Circle of Kings? What am I to learn from this Circle of Kings? Essentially, if one develops a good understanding of Circle of Kings and the logic behind it, the ways to go about it, use it dynamically over situations and time, perhaps we may be able to answer this question: what is the value of multiple joint ventures and alliances? So I just wanted to sprinkle a little bit of Arthashastra in front of you. All that I want to say is what personally amazed me is the elaborate thinking that has gone behind not just 100 or 200 years back, a good 2000 years back, enormous amount of thinking, enormous levels of detail, and there are very interesting ideas which I think we must look at, both from a public administration perspective as well as from a business administration perspective. So I would sort of conclude this by saying that people keep asking me, sir, is Arthashastra relevant? After all, things are written 2000 years back. Kautilya is great. I worship Kautilya, but why do you need it today? I mean, do we really need it today? So this question begs some attention. So I will just, in the context of what I have discussed, I will think about a few things. In Kautilya, your Arthashastra, you find various categories of state employees, discussion on their qualification, hierarchical salary structures, which provide a very good understanding of public administration. I think there is a lot of merit in reading it. We will be able to take a clean slate and if not a clean slate, a fresh approach to our own public administration. I think it pays to read it and understand where from Kautilya is coming. I don't think you can just dismiss it off, because the ideas are very potentially very, very relevant and useful. Putting in place checks and balances to ensure that those occupying powerful positions do not indulge in corrupt practices and exploit. See, there are two things which I see in Danda. One is, there is detailing of how do you make sure that the artisans, service providers, you want a repair service, and this person takes the money and goes away and you don't get this repair. Or, he says he has repaired and you are not satisfied. What are you going to do? They're all discussed in book 3. How do you protect the citizens from deficiency in service? How do you actually make sure that the ministers, the amatyas and some high-ranking people will not use their power and do corruption and then threaten, and there are some counter checks and balances. I think we must really look at it seriously because we can improve our quality of our education. Criminal investigation and methods I was just talking about, and the requirement for secret services, they are all discussed, and I think while all of them we can't use it straight away, there is a certain stamp of time there, but they certainly are worthwhile to look at for some modern applications. And of course, economic policies, sources of revenue for the state, budgeting and planning, these are all very interesting read. I think any public planner, and I would go to the extent of saying even a good corporate executive, that's why I showed that sort of equivalence between public administration and business administration. So I would only conclude by saying Arthashastra is a very serious piece of knowledge that we have. It's very versatile, very interesting, and I think it's time we sort of dip into it. I would like the education institutions, particularly in India and at other places, seriously take up Arthashastra in a big way. We will only benefit, the mankind will only benefit at the end of the day. Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope you did enjoy this short discourse on Arthashastra. Thank you.